There is a man standing in the dark. He is holding a shield, not because he needs protection. He has other things for that. He is holding the shield because it is polished to a mirror finish, because the bronze surface catches light the way still water does, and because the only way he can do what he came here to do is to look at her reflection instead of her face. Think about that for a moment. The hero, the chosen one, the son of Zeus, equipped by gods, guided by goddesses, given every advantage that divine favor can provide, and the only way he can win is to keep his eyes down. She is asleep when he enters. She does not know he is there. She does not get the chance to know. He raises the shield. He finds her in the reflection. He does what he came to do. And in the moment after, the silence that follows is not the silence of victory. It is something older, something that has the weight of a question that just became impossible to unask. We have been calling her a monster for 3,000 years. We have been looking at her through reflections for just as long. This is the story of what we have been avoiding looking at directly, and what it cost her that we did. Walk into the right museum on the right day, and you can see something that will stay with you. 2 sculptures, same label, same name on the placard. Medusa. One is ancient. The face is wide and flat. Tongue forced out between teeth. Eyes bulging. Cheekbones wrong, in the way that faces are wrong, when the person making them is trying to capture something that frightens them deeply and cannot quite decide what shape fear should take. It does not look like a woman. It barely looks like a face. It looks like what happens when a culture decides something is so dangerous it needs to be made inhuman before anyone can look at it. The other is usually understood as a Roman copy after a classical Greek type, modeled on an original from roughly the 5th century before the Common Era. Scholars call it the Rondinini Medusa. The face is calm. The eyes are open but unfocused, looking at something slightly past the viewer, something in the middle distance that nobody else can see. The mouth is soft. There is something in the expression that reads, unmistakably, as sorrow. Same name, same myth. Not the same person. This is where the story of Medusa actually begins. Not with a monster, not with a hero, not with a shield or a sword or a cave at the edge of the world. It begins with the fact that the people who told her story could not agree on who she was. And that disagreement has been running for nearly 3,000 years without a resolution. And the disagreement itself is the most interesting thing about her. Here is what the oldest sources give us. Hesiod wrote about Medusa in the 7th century before the Common Era, in a poem called the Theogony. In that account, Medusa is one of 3 Gorgon sisters. Her parents are Phorcys and Ceto, 2 ancient sea deities. Their children are beings of deep water and deep darkness, creatures that belong to the parts of the ocean that ships do not reach and light does not touch. Of the 3 Gorgon sisters, 2 are immortal. Steno and Euryale cannot die. Medusa can. Hesiod does not explain why. He states it the way you state a fact about weather or geography. 2 sisters will live forever. 1 will not. Then comes Ovid. Publius Ovidius Naso was a Roman poet writing in the 1st century of the Common Era, roughly 700 years after Hesiod. In his Metamorphose, one of the most influential works of literature ever produced, he told the story of Medusa in a way that nobody had told it before. In Ovid's version, Medusa was once beautiful, famously beautiful, and one day, in the temple of Minerva, the goddess we know as Athena, Medusa was violated by Neptune, the god we know as Poseidon, and then Minerva punished Medusa for it. That version of the story is not in Hesiod. It is a later Roman retelling, written by one poet, drawing on traditions we cannot fully trace, and it is the version that has dominated the Western imagination ever since. This matters. When a story changes between tellings, the change tells you something. It tells you what the new audience needed the story to mean. The Greeks needed Medusa to be a creature at the edge of the world. The Romans, or at least Ovid, needed her to have been something else first. Something recognizable, something that could be lost. And every generation since has looked at Medusa and found the version it needed. Ancient mythology does not preserve Medusa's own voice. Everything we know comes through poets, artists, heroes, and gods. This telling cannot recover the private Medusa. It can only ask what the surviving versions reveal when we stop treating her as an obstacle and start treating her as the center of the question. There was never just one Medusa, but there has always been a Medusa, and that persistent, unstoppable return to her name, to her face, to the question of what she was and what was done to her and what she became. That is the most interesting thing in the story. We keep coming back. We keep looking, even when we are supposed to look away. Before there was a monster, there was a sea, not the sea you picture when someone says the word, not the blue Mediterranean that Greek sailors crossed in wooden ships. The sea with harbors and trade routes and names for every stretch of coastline. The sea underneath that sea. The sea before maps. The deep water that the ancient Greeks imagined when they looked over the side of a boat at night and understood, in the part of the brain that operates below language, that the darkness below them had no bottom they would ever reach. Picture the edge of that world. The Greeks imagined it as a river called Okeanos, circling everything, the boundary between the known and the unnameable. And in the waters, at that boundary, in the place where the light from Olympus did not reach, and the laws that governed the orderly world began to loosen, there lived a family, Phorcys and Ceto. Do not think of them as parents in the way that word usually works. They were the sea-given names. Phorcys was the ancient one, the old man of the deep, a figure so old that even the gods treated his existence as a given, a geographical feature rather than a person. Ceto was the sea danger, the deep water hazard, the thing that fishermen meant when they prayed before launching their boats and hoped something was listening. Their children were not born the way ordinary children are born. They were produced by the deep, given shape by the part of the world that had never been tamed or named or brought into the light. The Graiae came first, 3 sisters, ancient from the moment of their birth, hair white before it had grown, skin the color of sea foam before sunrise. They shared between them a single eye and a single tooth, passing these between each other as needed, which meant that at any given moment, 2 of them were completely blind, and 1 could see. They lived in permanent dim light, in a cave at the edge of the world, and they knew the path to their sisters. Then the Gorgons, 3 sisters again. Stheno, whose name means strength, Euryale, whose name means far-roaming, and Medusa, whose name means guardian, or the one who rules, depending on which scholar you ask. Stheno and Euryale were immortal. Medusa was not. Hesiod states this without explanation, and we should sit with that for a moment, because the lack of explanation is doing real work here. In a family where the other children are either immortal or defined by a shared condition, one child is simply mortal. One child will age. One child can be killed. And Hesiod does not think this requires justification. It is the condition she was born into, the way some people are born into wealth, and some are born into debt. Except the currency here is time. They lived past the land of the Hesperides, where the sun went to sleep, past the garden, where golden apples grew, past the last place that had a name on any Greek map. Hesiod says they lived in the direction where night begins. Picture that geography seriously for a moment, because the Greeks took it seriously. The world they imagined had a center and a periphery. Olympus at the center, blazing with divine light, ruled by laws established through wars older than memory. The further you moved from Olympus, the more the laws changed, the more the light thinned, the more the creatures you encountered looked like things that did not fit neatly into the categories the gods had established. The Gorgons were not placed at the edge of the world because they were evil. They were placed there because that is where things that did not fit were kept. The world has edges for a reason. The center requires them, and this is the first thing to understand about Medusa. She did not wander to the periphery. She did not choose exile. She was born at the boundary between the ordered world and the dark water beyond it. And she belonged there in the way that people belong to the places that made them. She was not a threat to the center. She was not even visible from the center, until she was. There is a pattern in Greek mythology that repeats often enough to be worth naming. Something lives at the edge of the world, outside the reach of Olympian attention. And then something changes. The center becomes aware of the periphery. A god looks outward. A hero is sent. And the thing that had been living at the edge of the map, undisturbed, suddenly finds itself at the center of a story it did not choose to enter. The Gorgons had lived at the edge of the world for as long as the world had had edges. Then Poseidon looked west, and Medusa, the one who could be killed, the one for whom no explanation had been offered about why she alone among her sisters was mortal, found herself in a story that would not let her go. The sea that made her had given her everything it could. It could not give her the one thing that would have mattered. Stand at the edge of the ocean at night, when the water is dark enough that you cannot see where it ends, and try to imagine what it means to have been born there, not arrived there, not retreated there, born there, in the deep water, at the place where the world the gods managed became the world they did not bother with, born to parents who were the sea itself, given form and voice, born alongside sisters who would outlive every civilization that would ever tell stories about them. Born mortal, Steno was the eldest. Her name meant strength, and she carried that name like a physical attribute, something you could feel when she was nearby, a quality of presence that did not diminish with distance or time. She was immortal the way stone is immortal, not through any process of renewal, but simply because nothing in the world had the capacity to end her. She watched everything. That was her nature. A mind that will exist forever develops different habits than a mind that knows it will end. Memory, for Steno, was not a function of survival. It was the only project with a timescale long enough to be interesting. She watched Medusa the way you watch something you know is finite, with the particular quality of attention that the thing being watched often cannot see, but always, somehow, feels. Euryale was different. Euryale moved through the world with her whole body, felt weather before it arrived, understood the moods of the sea, the way musicians understand the moods of an instrument, where Stheno catalogued. Euryale inhabited. She was not less intelligent than her sister. She was intelligent in the opposite direction, downward into feeling rather than outward into observation. And then Medusa. She moved through the world near the water, near her sisters, near the place where the light changed quality, and the sky at night showed stars that no one else had names for. She was the youngest of the three Gorgons, and her mortality set her apart in ways that were practical and constant and mostly unspoken. She ate differently than her sisters did. She slept differently. She was cold in ways they were not cold and warm in ways they were not warm. Her body doing the endless work of bodies, the maintenance of temperature and circulation, and the ongoing negotiation with time that mortal creatures cannot stop performing even when they sleep. She would age, already, in the deep time of a family where two members would outlive the sun. She was aging, not visibly, not in ways anyone would notice yet, But the process had begun the moment she was born. The slow and certain progress of a mortal body. Through the years it had been allotted. Stheno noticed. Stheno noticed everything. Euryale did not think about it the way Stheno thought about it. Euryale simply loved Medusa with the unguarded completeness of someone who has not yet fully understood what loss is. Even though she was old enough to have watched entire generations of mortal creatures be born and die. With Medusa, it was different. The knowledge was there, somewhere in the back of her understanding. But the heart found reasons to keep it at arm's length. Mortals did that. Immortals, it turned out, did the same thing when it was someone they loved. Pindar, writing in the 5th century before the Common Era, preserved a detail that most later tellings dropped or softened. After Medusa's death, the cries of her sisters were so extreme, so raw and enormous, that Athena was moved to create music from them. In Pindar's telling, the goddess heard the sound of 2 immortal women losing, the one among them who could be lost, and she fashioned the first flute to capture something of that frequency, that particular sound of grief too large for the world to contain. Think about what that means. An instrument that would go on to accompany weddings and festivals and the drinking songs of men who did not remember where the music came from. That instrument, in this tradition, began as an attempt to hold on to the sound of sisters who could not die, losing the one who could. That grief has to be planted here, in the time before, in the years when the 3 sisters were simply 3 sisters at the edge of the world, for it to carry its full weight later. The 3 of them together were something that the mythology rarely pauses to show. They could look at each other. This sounds like a small thing. It will not sound small later. In a story where Medusa's gaze becomes the most feared thing in the world, where people will go to extraordinary lengths to avoid meeting her eyes, where the greatest hero of his generation will refuse to look at her directly, even in the moment of killing her. The fact that her sisters could meet her eyes and hold her gaze and stay. That is the most intimate detail in the entire mythology. It is also the thing that will make everything that comes later harder to bear. Because what the story is building toward, underneath the monsters and the heroes and the gods and the great machinery of Greek divine politics, is something much simpler and much more devastating. A family at the edge of the world. 2 sisters who would live forever, one who would not, and the particular, irreplaceable closeness of people who can look at each other without flinching. All of that was going to be taken, not because Medusa had done anything wrong, not because the edge of the world had stopped being safe, but because someone at the center looked outward one day and saw something that he wanted, and the distance between wanting and taking, for a god with Poseidon's power, was not very large. The water was still the night before everything changed. Euryale watched the horizon. Stheno watched Medusa, and Medusa, who did not yet know that she had been noticed, looked up at stars that no one else had named, breathing the salt air of the only home she had ever known. Alive, in the complete and unremarkable way that people are alive before the story begins. That is the version of her the world decided not to keep. Go to the Palazzo dei Conservatori in Rome and find the Medusa of Bernini. It was carved in the 17th century, from a single block of marble, by a man who had spent his life making stone look like flesh. Gian Lorenzo Bernini was 60 years old when he made it, at the height of his powers, and what he produced is one of the most unsettling objects in the history of Western sculpture. The mouth is open slightly, not in a roar but in something closer to a sharp intake of breath, the expression of someone who has just understood something terrible and has not yet decided how to respond to that understanding. The snakes in her hair are not decorative. They are alive, twisting, some of them pulling away from the head as if trying to escape what is happening to her. Her eyes are wide. She looks like someone in the middle of a transformation they did not choose. Bernini made her this way on purpose. He was working in a tradition that had been building for over 1,000 years. The tradition that flows from Ovid's version of the myth. The version where Medusa was once a woman before she became something else. And in that tradition, the question that obsessed artists was not what Medusa was. It was what she had been. Here is what Ovid gives us, Perseus, explaining to dinner guests how he obtained Medusa's head. Tells them her story. He describes her as once having been famous for her beauty, especially her hair, which many men had desired. And then, in the temple of Minerva, Neptune violated her, and Minerva, averting her gaze from the act, transformed Medusa's hair into serpents as punishment. That is the entirety of what Ovid gives us. A few lines. Perseus telling the story at a party, almost as an aside, before moving on to other adventures. Those few lines have generated more argument, more art, more reinterpretation, more anguish than almost any passage of similar length in Western literature, because Ovid did something that Hesiod did not do. He gave Medusa a before. In Hesiod, there is no before. Medusa is a Gorgon. She was always a Gorgon. The question of what she might have been prior to that does not arise because the mythology does not leave space for it. She is a creature of the deep water, born to Phorcys and Ceto, mortal while her sisters are not. But Ovid's version introduces time into the story, before and after. Once she was beautiful, then something happened. Now she is what she is. And the moment you introduce before and after, you introduce the question of cause. Stand in front of Bernini's sculpture and feel how that works. The marble face is caught between the person she was and the thing she is becoming. The snakes are mid-motion. The mouth is mid-breath. The eyes are mid-understanding. She is in the exact moment of the hinge. And Bernini has frozen her there in white stone. And the freezing is its own kind of cruelty, because it means she will be in that moment forever. Caravaggio painted her 30 years before Bernini carved her, on a circular surface in the shape of a ceremonial shield. He gave her the expression of pure shock, the split second of realizing what has happened at the very instant it is too late to change it. He painted the moment of her death, not her transformation. But the emotional logic is the same. She is always mid-moment, always in the space between what she was and what she has been made. Both artists were working in Ovid's tradition, the tradition that requires her to have been something before she was this. The ancient Greek artists who painted Gorgon faces on pottery and temple pediments were working in Hesiod's tradition. Their Medusa was always this. There was no before. The face that frightened away evil was simply the face of something born frightening. Two traditions, same name, completely different moral universe. Now ask which one is more honest about what actually happens to the people who end up becoming the things we fear. The story, where the monster was always a monster, asks nothing of the world that produced her. It asks only that you acknowledge the danger and take appropriate measures. But the story, where someone was a person, and then the world did what it does, and then there was something the world could point at and call dangerous. That story asks something much harder. It asks who made the monster, and it asks whether the world that made her and the world that feared her were the same world. Ovid does not answer that question directly. He has Perseus mention it at a dinner party, briefly, between bites. And somehow that brevity, that almost casual delivery of the most devastating detail in the story, has haunted Western imagination for 2,000 years more effectively than any elaborate treatment could have. The marble face in Rome is still open-mouthed, still in the middle of understanding, still becoming what she never chose to be. There is a moment in every story about betrayal by a trusted place that arrives before the betrayal. It is the moment when a person enters the courthouse, the hospital, the place of worship. They enter because they believe in what the place represents, or because they have no better option, or simply because the protection is the entire point of the place, and they have been told all their lives that the place exists for exactly this reason. That moment, before everything goes wrong, is the one that matters most, because the failure that follows is not just the failure of a single event. It is the failure of everything the place was supposed to mean. In Ovid's telling, the detail that has haunted the story of Medusa for 2,000 years is not only what Neptune did, it is where the temple of Minerva. Step back and feel what that space meant in the ancient world. Minerva, the goddess of wisdom and strategic intelligence, was the patron of the kinds of human activity that separate civilization from chaos. Her temples were not simply buildings. They were the architectural embodiment of a guarantee. Inside these walls, order applies. Inside these walls, there is something more powerful than the appetite and the force that governs the world outside. Medusa was in that temple. Neptune entered the most sacred space of one of the most powerful beings in the divine hierarchy, and he did what he wanted to do. Ovid does not dwell on the scene. He has Perseus mention it in passing, as background, as context for the explanation of Medusa's appearance. The brevity is its own kind of commentary. This is the kind of thing that gets mentioned and moved past, as if the speed of telling is a way of managing what the telling contains. What Ovid gives more attention to is what comes after. Minerva punishes Medusa. She transforms Medusa's hair into serpents. The specifically chosen detail of the hair, the famous hair, the feature Ovid tells us was the first thing people noticed about Medusa. That hair is turned into something that bites. There are scholars who have argued that this was Minerva's way of protecting Medusa. Make her frightening. Give her a defense that beauty could not provide. There is a reading available where the transformation is not punishment, but armor. But here is what that reading requires you to ignore. Medusa was not consulted. She did not ask to be changed. She did not ask the goddess whose temple she had entered, whose threshold she had trusted, to decide what form the response to her violation would take. A goddess looked at the aftermath and made a decision about what needed to be corrected. The correction was the woman, not the god. The shrine was supposed to be a place of protection. In the story that survived, it became the place where protection failed twice. Once by Neptune, once by the goddess whose name was on the door. Now hold this image. Minerva stands in her own temple the morning after. The stone floor, the altar, the smell of offerings, and the evidence of what happened, still present in the quality of the air, in the specific wrongness of a sacred space that has been made wrong. She looks at what is in front of her. Neptune is gone. Neptune is always already gone in these situations. He is the god of the sea, brother of Jupiter, one of the three great Olympian brothers who divided the world between them at the beginning of the age. He cannot be summoned back to this temple to answer for what he did here. He cannot be held by the authority of this space he just violated, because his power is equal to the power of the space, and in some ways greater. What Minerva has in front of her is the remaining variable. Medusa is still there, and a system looking for resolution will always resolve in the direction of what it can reach. This is not the myth saying Minerva was evil. The myth does not say that. What the myth preserves is sequence. First this happened, then that happened, and the sequence, read plainly, reveals something about how order works when it is threatened and who bears the cost of restoring it. The resolution that comes from changing Medusa is clean, efficient. It addresses the visible evidence of the disruption and converts it into something the system can categorize and contain. A woman violated in a temple is a complicated situation. A dangerous creature exiled to the edge of the world is a much simpler one. The temple went back to being a temple. Medusa went to Sarpedon. The shrine was restored. Everything the shrine was supposed to represent was not. We have been starting Medusa's story at the wrong place for a very long time. It does not begin with a monster. It begins with a woman who walked into a place that was supposed to protect her. And what happened next was not her fault. And everything that came after, the cave and the snakes and the hero with the shield and the head that kept winning long after the body was gone, all of it flows from the decision made in that temple on the morning after. That is where Medusa's story begins, in the place that was supposed to keep her safe. There is a version of Athena that is easy to hate. In that version, she is a goddess who watched a woman be violated in her own temple and responded by punishing the woman. She is the divine authority figure who, when confronted with a failure of her own institution, chose the path of least resistance. She is the goddess of wisdom who looked at an injustice and decided that the most efficient solution was to change the victim into something the world would not feel obligated to protect. That version is available in the text, but it is incomplete in a way that makes the story smaller than it actually is. Athena was born from the head of Zeus, not from a mother, not from the ordinary process of generation, but directly from the mind of the king of the gods, fully formed and fully armed. Her parentage was her identity. She was not a goddess who happened to be wise. She was wisdom given divine form. The principle of ordered intelligence made into a person and given a seat on Olympus. Her domain was specific. Strategic intelligence, the wisdom that builds things and defends them. She was the patron of craftsmen and architects and generals, of people who take the raw material of the world and impose structure on it. Her city, Athens, was named for her. Her symbol was the owl, the creature that sees clearly in the dark. Now stand in her temple the morning after. The owl sees clearly in the dark. What Athena saw that morning was a situation with specific constraints, and she moved through those constraints the way she moved through everything, with the cold precision of the most strategic mind in the divine hierarchy. Neptune was Poseidon, brother of Jupiter, one of the three great Olympian brothers who had divided the world between them at the beginning of the age. Sky, sea, underworld, each sovereign in his domain, each protected by the same ancient agreements that held the Olympian order together. An action by Poseidon in Athena's temple was an act of disrespect toward her. Yes, but it was also an act by a god whose power was equivalent to hers, a god who answered to Zeus and to the same foundational agreements that governed all of them. The myth does not tell us that Athena calculated this precisely. What the myth preserves is what she did, and what she did tells us how she read the situation. She did not escalate. She did not challenge Neptune. She did not bring the violation before Zeus in a way that would require the entire Olympian hierarchy to take a position on the relative authority of two of its most powerful members. Instead, she looked at what was in front of her, and she solved the problem in the direction it could be solved. Medusa was the remaining variable, so Athena changed her. The cold precision of this is what makes it so difficult to look at directly. It was not cruelty in the way that cruelty usually works, with malice driving toward a specific harm. It was something that in some ways is harder to argue with. It was the response of a goddess, operating within the constraints of a power structure she had not designed and could not unilaterally change, making the only move the board allowed. One possible reading is that Athena genuinely believed the transformation protected Medusa, that a woman made frightening was a woman made safer from future violations of the same kind, that the snakes were armor rather than punishment. The ancient sources do not resolve this. They preserve the action and leave the interior life of the goddess to the reader. What they do not leave to the reader is the outcome. Medusa was changed. Order was restored. And here is the detail that the mythology carries forward into everything that comes after. The detail that transforms this from a story about one bad morning in one temple into something that echoes for 3,000 years. Athena later places Medusa's head on her aegis. The aegis is the divine breastplate, the most powerful protective object in the Olympian arsenal. After Perseus delivers the head, Athena takes it and fastens it to the center of her armor. She wears Medusa's face as her protection. She carries into every divine conflict the face of the woman who was changed in her temple, the face that her own decision helped create. Positioned at the center of the thing she uses to defend herself. We will return to this in full, but planted here, in the chapter about what Athena saw and what Athena chose. As a question that the rest of the story will need to answer, the goddess looked at a woman in her temple and decided the woman must be changed. Years later, the same goddess looked at that woman's severed head and decided it was useful. The face that could not be allowed to remain what it was became the face the goddess chose to wear. What does it mean when the place that failed you later profits from what that failure produced? Athena is not the villain of this story, but she is something that villains let us avoid thinking about. She is the intelligent, principled, genuinely powerful representative of a divine order that caused harm not through malice but through the ordinary operation of its own logic. And the ordinary operation of that logic, on a particular morning in a particular temple, looked at a woman who had done nothing wrong and found in her the most available solution to a problem she had not created. The owl sees clearly in the dark. It does not always choose to illuminate what it finds there. There is a moment that no version of the myth describes directly. The moment after, not the transformation itself. The morning after the transformation. The first time Medusa walked down to the water and looked at her reflection and understood, without anyone having to explain it to her, what her life had just become. Bodies are intimate in a way that nothing else is. You live inside yours in a way you do not live inside anything else. You know its rhythms and its temperatures, and the specific quality of its comfort and discomfort in a way that is prior to language, prior to thought. Just the immediate animal fact of inhabiting this particular physical form and not any other. So feel this slowly. She reaches the water. She looks down. The reflection she finds is not the reflection she has been finding her whole life. The hair is moving, though the air is still. The snakes are alive in the way that her hair never was, with their own intentions, their own small, autonomous movements, responding to her emotional state in ways she cannot yet predict or control. When she is calm, they settle. When something startles her, they rise. Her interior life, which had always been hers alone, private, something she could manage or conceal or simply experience in peace, is now written on her head, in a language everyone around her can read. She steps back from the water. She tries again. The reflection is the same. And then there are the eyes. This is the part the mythology preserves most consistently across every tradition and every century of retelling. The gaze of Medusa turns whatever meets it to stone. Not sometimes. Not at full strength or partial strength, depending on conditions. Always. Completely. Irreversibly. Think about what it means to have that power and not want it. The eyes are how we connect. Before language. Before touch. Before any of the elaborate social technologies humans have developed to communicate with each other. The eyes are the first and most fundamental channel. You look at another person and something passes between you. Recognition. The basic exchange that says, I see you. You see me. We are both here. Medusa lost that in the same moment she gained everything the mythology calls dangerous. She could not look at anyone without destroying them. She could not meet eyes across a space. Could not hold a gaze in conversation. Could not do the most basic thing that conscious creatures do with each other. Every living thing that approached her and met her eyes became part of the permanent record of what her face had become. She did not choose to turn them to stone. The power did not ask her permission. Walk with her now through the first days. The birds that had always moved through the air around the coast of Sarpedon, learning a new geography that kept them at a different distance. The small animals of the cliff face retreating. The quality of the silence changing around her, becoming the silence of things that have recalculated the safe perimeter. And then, at some point, that the mythology records only through implication. The first person, someone who came too close, or came deliberately, drawn by the same curiosity that draws people toward dangerous things. Someone who looked, and then the stillness where a living creature had been. She did not run from it. There is no version of the myth where Medusa runs. There is a version where she goes to the edge of the world and builds a life in the only geography the world has left her. And that version is the one worth following. The word monster comes from the Latin monstrum, which means omen or portent, something whose existence is itself a message from the gods to the human world. Monsters were not simply dangerous. They were meaningful. Their existence communicated something. What was Medusa's existence supposed to communicate? In Hesiod's tradition, the answer is relatively simple. She was a creature of the periphery, a thing that lived at the boundary between the ordered world and the chaos beyond it. And her danger was the danger of that boundary. Look too long at the edges of the world, and something looks back. In Ovid's tradition, the answer is far more uncomfortable. If Medusa was made rather than born, then her existence as a monster is not a message about the periphery. It is a message about the center, about what the center does when it needs a problem to disappear, about the specific transformation that happens when power takes something it cannot answer for and converts it into something the world can file under a category it already has. She walked away from the water that first morning. She did not go back to the temple. She did not present herself to anyone for further judgment. She did not ask for help from the beings who had the power to reverse what had been done, because the being with that power had already made her decision, and the decision was this. She went to the edge. She built a life in the only geography available to her, a life organized around the constraint of what she had become, in the company of the sea and the strange sky, and the sisters who would keep showing up in the way that people who love you keep showing up when you have been placed somewhere the world would rather not look. The mornings at Sarpedon were different from mornings anywhere else. She would learn them completely. She would learn the ground under her feet, and the direction of the wind, and the specific color the water turned at different hours, and the way the stars at night surrounded you rather than hovering above you, because at the edge of the world there were no buildings to contain the view, and the sky was a full sphere you were inside rather than a ceiling you were under. She would make that sky hers. For a time, there is a particular kind of silence that belongs to places at the edge of the world, not the silence of emptiness, not the silence of absence, the silence of a place that has decided it does not need to make itself legible to anyone passing through. The rocks at Sarpedon did not explain themselves. The water there moved the way water moves when no one has given it a name or drawn it on a map or decided what it was supposed to do. The sky above that coastline was the sky that existed before anyone looked up and started making stories about what they saw in it. Medusa lived there, not as a prisoner, not as an exile counting days toward a fixed end. She lived there the way people live in places that have become theirs through years of daily contact, through learning where the ground was soft and where it was solid, through knowing which direction the wind came from before a storm and which rocks held warmth longest after the sun moved on. She knew that coastline the way you know the inside of your own home in the dark, by feel, by the specific texture of familiarity that builds over time between a person and the place they inhabit. The stones were everywhere. This detail appears in every version of the myth, and no version lingers on it the way it deserves. The area around her home was full of stone figures. Men, mostly. Some animals. Some creatures that had wandered in from whatever wilderness surrounded the place. They stood in various postures, some with arms raised as if warding off something, some mid-stride as if they had been walking when the moment came, some simply upright with expressions the stone preserved in permanent ambiguity, expressions that could have been fear or wonder or the specific blankness of a person who has not yet understood what is happening to them. They were the record. Every figure in that landscape was a moment. A pair of eyes that had met hers before their owner understood the consequence of meeting them. Some had come deliberately, drawn by stories of the monster at the edge of the world, by the specific magnetism that dangerous things have always exercised over people who believe they can manage danger better than the people who failed before them. Some had simply wandered in, travelers who had misread their maps, who rounded a cliff face and found themselves somewhere they had not intended to be. None of them had intended to stay. None of them had been given a choice about leaving. Medusa moved among them every day. She walked past them to reach the water. She walked past them to reach the higher ground where she could see the horizon. They were her landscape, the way any permanent feature of a landscape becomes part of the texture of daily existence. Familiar after enough years. Simply the shape of the place where you live. But she had not stopped. The stone figures were evidence of her power. Yes, they were also evidence that she was still there, still moving through the world, still waking up in the mornings and going to the water and looking at the horizon and living the life that was available to her in the margins. She had not dissolved into the grief of her transformation. She had not refused the years. She was there, in the landscape of her own exile, making something of it that deserves a better word than exile. The light at Sarpedon was different from the light elsewhere. Something about the angle, about the way the water and the sky met at that particular stretch of coast, produced a quality of illumination that did not exist in the places where proper cities stood and proper gods were properly worshipped. It was older light somehow, more patient, the kind of light that does not ask anything of the things it falls on. The stars at night were different too, not different constellations, not a different sky, but a different relationship between the viewer and the sky. In the great cities, in Athens and Corinth, and the places where civilization had built itself upward, the stars were overhead, something above you, looking down, at a fixed distance that the architecture of the city maintained, at the edge of the world, without buildings to contain the sight. The stars were not above you. They were around you. The sky was a sphere, you were inside, and the water reflected it so that you were surrounded on all sides by darkness studded with light, floating in the middle of something that had no floor and no ceiling and no edges. She had learned to sleep in that sky. She had learned the particular quality of morning at Sarpedon, the way the darkness lifted in stages. Blue-black first, and then the grey that exists before colour returns to things, and then the colour coming back slowly from the east. The water turning from grey to green, to the particular shade of blue that the Mediterranean holds in early morning, like a promise it makes every day, regardless of who is there to receive it. She had learned which rocks were good to sit on, and which were too exposed to the wind, and which held heat from the previous day until mid-morning, and were warm to the touch, in a way that felt, on cold nights, like something almost like company. She had a life there. It was not the life that the center of the world would have recognized as worth having. It had no city, no ceremony, no place in the hierarchies that the Olympian order used to organize existence into categories of value, but it had the sea and the stones and the strange late light and the stars that surrounded you rather than merely hovering above. It had the mornings. It had the knowledge of the ground underfoot, which is a specific and undervalued kind of knowledge. The knowledge that comes from walking the same geography for years until the ground becomes an extension of your own body. And it had her sisters. Not always, not every day, but Stheno and Euryale came. And when they came without the performance of normalcy that people put on when they are uncomfortable with a situation and want to demonstrate that they are not. They came without the specific quality of pity that can feel worse than indifference, because it requires you to manage the emotions of the person doing the pitying. They came, and they sat with her, and they looked at her directly. In a story where looking at Medusa directly ends in stone, this is not a small thing. This is the whole thing. The sisters could look at her because they were Gorgons, because they were family, because whatever immunity existed between them was built into the same blood and the same origin and the same deep water that had made all three of them. They sat with her, and the looking went both ways, and nothing turned to stone, and the afternoon moved, at the pace that afternoons move, when you are with people you do not have to perform anything for. She was not only what had happened to her, she was also this: the mornings, the light, the sisters, the stones she had learned by name, even if the names were only hers. The world had compressed her life into the margins. She had made the margins into a life. That was everything. That was also not enough to save her. But it was real. And it happened. And it should be remembered as part of what was taken when the man with the shield arrived. Not just a life that was in the margins of the world, genuinely hers. Athena arrived the way she always arrived, without announcement, stepping out of the cliff path as if she had simply always been there, and the rock had only just decided to stop obscuring her. She moved through the world with the economy of someone who had been moving through it for long enough that the distinction between arriving and having always been present had become largely theoretical. She sat down. She looked at Medusa. Medusa looked back. This is the exchange that the mythology does not know what to do with, so it mostly ignores it. The gaze that passes between Medusa and her sisters is the inversion of every other gaze in the story. Every other gaze goes wrong. Every other pair of eyes that meets hers becomes the last pair of eyes that meets hers. The connection ended immediately and permanently by the power that lives in her face. But with Steno and Euryale, the gaze simply continues, back and forth. The ordinary traffic of attention between people who know each other well enough to look without flinching. In Medusa's world, two things were true simultaneously. She was the most isolated creature in existence. Her power made genuine connection impossible with almost everything. The birds kept their distance. The animals at Sarpedon had learned to stay out of her direct sight. Every living thing that could avoid her eyes did. And the ones that could not join the permanent record of the landscape, and she was loved, specifically, concretely, by two people who had chosen to keep showing up in a place that most people would not approach for any reason. Steno brought information. She had been moving through the world, as she always had, and she carried back the texture of it, the quality of what the wider world was doing, what was building and what was fading. She talked to Medusa the way a person talks to someone they trust, with the unfiltered version of their observations, without the editing that social performance requires. She told her about the cities and the gods and the small political weather of Olympus. Not because any of it required action, but because knowing things about the wider world is one of the ways you stay connected to a world that has pushed you to its edge. Euryale brought herself. She was a large presence. Euryale. Not in physical scale, but in the quality of her attention. The way she filled the space around her with a kind of emotional weather that other people could feel without being able to name. She sat close to Medusa and did not fill the silence with speech and did not perform comfort. She simply was there, in the full sense of being there, present without agenda, without the need to demonstrate her presence or to extract something from it. She watched the sea, while Steno watched Medusa. And the three of them, in that triangle of attention, were doing something the mythology has no category for. Something that was not worship and not war, and not the transactional relationship that most beings in the Greek mythological world maintained with each other. They were keeping each other company, in a world where Medusa's company was literally lethal to everything else. Her sisters chose it anyway. Steno and Euryale were immortal. They had an infinite future, an unlimited supply of time, an eternity worth of days to fill with whatever they chose. Every moment they spent at Sarpedon was a moment freely chosen from an unlimited supply, and they kept choosing it. The mythology does not present this as heroism. It presents it as background, as the expected behavior of family members in a story about something else. But in the context of what Medusa's life had become, in the context of a world that had arranged itself to avoid looking at her directly, the choice of two immortal beings to keep showing up and keep looking at her was a form of insistence, an insistence that she was worth looking at, that her presence was not merely a hazard to be navigated, but a person to be seen. Pindar preserved the detail about what happened after Medusa's death. The cries of the Gorgon sisters so extreme that Athena fashioned music from them. The first flute. In this tradition, born from the sound of Stheno and Euryale in the sky above Sarpedon, chasing a hero they could not find because he was invisible, unable to reach what they could not see. They could not catch him, but they tried. Plant that here. Plant it in this afternoon, at Sarpedon, in the unremarkable fact of Euryale watching the sea while Stheno watched Medusa, and Medusa looked back at both of them. Plant it in the specific quality of Euryale's attention, the way she felt the world, completely, rather than recording it, the way she loved, without reservation or calculation. Plant it here so that when the sound arrives later, the cry that Pindar preserved across 25 centuries, the sound will not arrive as the cry of monsters. It will arrive as what it actually was, the cry of a sister who loved someone she could not save. There is a moment, somewhere in the long afternoon of those visits at Sarpedon, that the mythology does not record and that the shape of the relationship makes possible to imagine. At some point, in the deep time of a family that had been watching the Greek world tell its stories for long enough to recognize the grammar of those stories, one of them knew, not through prophecy, through pattern recognition, through the accumulated knowledge of living in the Greek mythological world long enough to understand how these particular kinds of stories tended to go. Heroes were being made. The gods were interested in certain outcomes. The world was moving in a direction that creatures who had watched enough of its movement could read. The mortals always died in these stories, whether Stheno said this to Medusa, whether the three of them sat with that knowledge between them and chose to name it, or chose to let the afternoon continue without naming it. The story does not tell us. What the story gives us is the behavior, the continued visits, the ordinary afternoons, the choice, made again and again across the years, to show up in a place that was difficult to reach and sit with someone who could not safely sit with anyone else. That behavior is its own kind of answer. It says, I know what this is building toward. It says, I am here anyway. In a mythology full of grand gestures and world-shaking acts of power and vengeance, this is the gesture that costs the most and gets the least acknowledgement. Two immortals, choosing again and again the company of the one among them who could be taken. Until the morning, they could not choose it anymore. There is a city called Seriphos. It sits on a small island in the Aegean Sea, rocky and dry, the kind of place that the ancient world produced in abundance. An island that was neither important enough to be a center of power, nor remote enough to be left entirely alone. The kind of place where a moderately ambitious man could become king and find that being king of Seriphos was both more and less than he had imagined kingship would be. Polydectes was that kind of king. He was not a figure of cosmic evil. He was not a villain in the way that the mythology's great villains are villains. Through some fundamental corruption of the divine order, or through an act of transgression so extreme that it warranted divine attention, he was simply a man with a moderate amount of power and an appetite slightly larger than his power could comfortably satisfy, which is a description that fits more of the people who have shaped history than the history books tend to acknowledge. He wanted Dana. Dana had arrived on Seriphos in a chest, carried by the sea, with a child she had conceived with Zeus himself. The child was Perseus. The story of how Dana ended up in a chest drifting across the Aegean is its own chapter in the mythology. involving a grandfather who received a prophecy about a grandson who would kill him and responded the way people respond to prophecies they cannot accept, by trying to prevent them through means that only guarantee the outcome they were trying to avoid. He locked Dana in a bronze chamber. Zeus found her anyway. The grandfather put her and the infant Perseus in the chest and committed them to the sea. The sea delivered them to Seriphos. Polydectes saw Dana and wanted her. Perseus, who had grown from an infant into a young man on Seriphos, stood between Polydectes and his mother with the specific determination of a person who does not have very much power, but has positioned that power in the one place where it creates a meaningful obstacle. He could not match the king's resources or authority. What he could do was be present, insistently, in a way that made the path between Polydectes and Dana inconveniently complicated. Polydectes needed Perseus gone. This is the entirety of the political logic that will kill Medusa, not divine necessity, not the protection of the innocent, not the heroic imperative to rid the world of a dangerous creature whose existence threatened the stability of the cosmos. A man on a small rocky island in the Aegean needed a young man out of the way so he could have access to a woman who did not want him. The mechanism he chose was an impossible quest, and the target he chose was Medusa. The occasion was a feast. Picture the hall, torchlight on stone walls, the smell of wine and roasted meat, Polydectes at the head of the table, his court arranged around him. The comfortable theatre of power in a small place, on a small island, that nonetheless believed in its own ceremonies. Perseus, somewhere in the room, young, without resources, aware that he is in a situation with parameters he did not design. Polydectes announced that he was seeking to marry Hippodamia, a princess elsewhere in the Greek world, and that each of his guests would be expected to contribute a horse to the gift he intended to send. Perseus had no horse. He had grown up on Seriphos as the son of a woman who arrived in a chest, without wealth or standing or the resources that the king's other guests took for granted. He said he would bring whatever Polydectes wanted instead. Polydectes said he wanted the head of Medusa. The trap was set before Perseus walked into it. Polydectes knew what he was asking for. He knew that no one had ever completed this task. He knew the geography of where Medusa lived and the nature of what she was. The gaze that turned people to stone, the remote location at the edge of the world. He knew that a young man without resources or divine connections had no realistic prospect of returning from this mission. He was not setting a challenge. He was issuing a sentence, and somewhere at the edge of the world, in the rocky landscape of Sarpedon, surrounded by the stone record of her own accumulated power, Medusa continued to live her life without knowing that her name had just been spoken at a feast on a small island by a man who had never met her. She had become a solution to a problem she had no part in creating. Here is the machinery, laid out plainly. Polydectes wants Dana. Perseus protects Dana. Polydectes needs Perseus gone. Polydectes manufactures a mission that will kill Perseus. The mission requires a target. The target is a woman at the edge of the world who has no idea she has been cast in this role. She will be found. She will be killed. Polydectes will be rid of Perseus. The world will call it heroism. Medusa will be called a monster because that is the necessary framing for the mission to make sense. The word monster, in this context, is not a description. It is a job title. It means this is the thing we have decided the hero needs to kill so that the story can proceed. Medusa was not a threat that needed addressing for the world's safety. She was living at the edge of the world, far from Seriphos, far from the trade routes and the political concerns of the Aegean islands. The danger she presented was the danger of proximity, and proximity required a deliberate journey to a place that most people had no reason to go. She had not moved towards Seriphos. She had not threatened Polydectes or anyone in his kingdom. She was the convenient answer to a king's domestic problem. On Seriphos, Polydectes raised his cup and nodded. The mission was accepted. The machinery was running. And at Sarpedon, in the quiet that belongs to places that have not yet been found by the stories building toward them, the sea moved against the rocks, the way it had moved every day for longer than anyone had been counting. Medusa was still there, still alive, for now. The gifts arrived the way divine gifts always arrive in these stories, not through any process of application or merit or demonstrated readiness. The gifts arrived because the gods had decided they should arrive, and Perseus was the instrument through whom a certain outcome would be expressed. He received a lot from Athena, a shield polished to a mirror finish, bronze worked to a reflective surface, precise enough to show a clear image, precise enough to navigate by, precise enough to find a sleeping woman without meeting her eyes. From Hermes, the Talaria, winged sandals that allowed flight, that removed the constraint of geography from the mission entirely. Also from Hermes, the harp, a curved blade whose design was specific to a particular kind of cut. From the nymphs, the cabysis, a bag made to hold the head of Medusa without destroying the person carrying it, a container specifically designed for the aftermath of the killing, a piece of equipment whose existence presupposed the outcome with such confidence that someone had manufactured it in advance, and the helm of Hades, the cap of invisibility, which allowed the wearer to move without being seen, to approach without warning, to arrive at a destination without giving anyone there the chance to know they were being approached. Look at this list. A shield for looking without being seen, sandals for traveling without constraint, a blade designed for a specific cut, a bag designed for specific contents, a helmet for approaching without warning. Every item on this list is optimized for one outcome: the killing of Medusa under conditions that prevent her from exercising the one defense she has. She cannot turn him to stone if he does not look at her. She cannot flee if he can fly. She cannot fight if she does not know he is there. She cannot survive the blade made specifically for what the blade will do. The gods gave Perseus everything he needed to kill her. No tool for understanding her. This matters more than it sounds. A toolkit is not neutral. A toolkit is a philosophy made physical. It tells you what the person who assembled it believed the situation required. And this toolkit, assembled by divine hands with divine foresight, told Perseus exactly one thing about what his situation required. He was 19 or 20, which, in the ancient world, meant he was fully adult and fully responsible for his choices. He had a mother to protect. He had a king who had maneuvered him into an impossible promise. He had gods offering him help. He had a culture with specific and consistent things to say about what the correct response to monster-related problems was. He took the gifts. He would have been strange not to take the gifts. But here is where the question about Athena becomes something you cannot set down once you pick it up. Athena had been in this story before. She had been in it at the temple, on the morning when she looked at the aftermath of what Neptune had done and made her decision about what needed to be corrected. She had transformed Medusa. She had made the face that Perseus would later need to avoid looking at directly. She had created, through her own action, the specific danger that now required the specific toolkit she was providing. She gave Perseus the shield. The shield she gave him was designed for exactly the kind of looking that her own decision had made necessary. She wanted this particular mission to succeed. The divine investment in the outcome was not generic heroic sponsorship. It was personal. A living Medusa was a permanent fact about what had happened in a temple a long time ago. A fact that existed in the world and could not be argued with or reframed or reclassified. A dead Medusa was a story about a hero and a monster. And a story about a hero and a monster is much easier to manage than the other kind of story. The ancient sources do not give Athena a speech about this. They give her behavior. And behavior, in a mythology as precise as the Greek one, is the closest thing available to a character's inner life. She equipped Perseus. She guided him toward the Grae. She was present in the architecture of the mission at every stage. Now picture Perseus rising on the winged sandals above the Aegean, the island of Seriphos shrinking below him, the sea spreading out in every direction in the late afternoon light. He is carrying a shield that shows him reflections, a blade designed for a cut, a bag designed for what the cut will produce, a helmet that makes him invisible. He has everything. He is flying west toward a woman he has never met. A woman living at the edge of the world in a life she built from what the world left her. And he has in his hands every instrument required to end that life. He does not know her name yet, in the way that knowing a name means something. He knows the label, Medusa, the monster, the thing the mission requires him to find and kill. He does not know about the mornings at Sarpedon, the light that was different from the light anywhere else, the rocks she had learned by feel in the dark, the sisters who kept showing up and kept looking at her in the way that only people who love you can look at you. He does not know any of that. The toolkit he was given did not include any way to find out. He flew west. The sea below him caught the last of the afternoon light and held it for a moment. Gold on green. Before the sun moved on, and the water went back to being water. The road to Medusa did not go directly to Medusa. It went first to the Grae. Perseus needed directions. The edge of the world is not on any map, which is the point of the edge of the world. And the Gorgons had chosen or been assigned a geography that resisted navigation by ordinary means. The path required knowledge that was not publicly available, knowledge that only certain beings held. And the beings who held it were 3 old women, sharing one eye between them in a cave at the boundary between the known world and the dark water beyond it. The Grae were the sisters of the Gorgons. Let that fact sit for a moment before the story moves on. The Grae were not random guardians assigned to this post by some neutral divine bureaucracy. They were family, daughters of the same Phorcys and Ceto who had produced Stheno and Uriel and Medusa, born of the same deep water, living at the same margin of the world, ancient from the moment of their birth, grey-haired before they had drawn their first breath, sharing between the 3 of them a single eye and a single tooth. They were called Dino, Enyo, and Pemphredo. Their names mean dread, horror, and alarm. Names given to them by the world that categorized them. Names that describe how they were perceived rather than who they were. They knew where their sisters lived. Of course they did. They were family. The cave sat at the edge of the known world, in a dim light that was neither day nor night, but something permanent and in between. The grey of a sky that has forgotten which direction it was heading. Inside. The 3 women moved with the practiced rhythm of people who have long since learned to navigate their world without sight. Their hands knowing the surfaces, their feet knowing the ground, their whole orientation to space rebuilt around the coordinates of touch and sound and the specific weight of familiarity. The eye passed between them on a schedule that the mythology does not describe in detail, but that the situation demands had a logic. 1 sees. 2. Wait. The eye moves. The seer becomes the waiter. The waiter becomes the seer. An arrangement as old as they were, as settled and unremarkable to them as breathing. Perseus arrived and watched from the darkness. He had the helm of Hades on his head, which meant they could not see him, which meant he could observe the rhythm of their existence without them knowing they were being observed. He watched the eye move. He watched the 2 without it sit in the grey blindness that was their default condition. Fingers folded, waiting for their turn at sight. He watched the one who held the eye look out at the world with the full attention of someone who knows their access to vision is temporary. He waited for the gap, the moment when the eye left one hand and had not yet reached the next, the moment when all 3 of them were blind simultaneously. For the second it took for the eye to travel, he stepped forward. He took the eye. Feel that scene from inside the cave. One moment's sight. The world, visible. The routine of the passing. The next moment, nothing. Not darkness exactly. Because darkness implies the memory of light. The sense of something that has been removed. This was older than that. This was the complete absence of the world. The cave becoming purely abstract. Purely the sounds of breath and stone, and the two sisters beside you, and the sudden impossibility of knowing where anything was. And then a voice, asking for directions. The Graier demanded the eye back. They threatened. They bargained. They said everything that people say when the one thing they need most has been taken by someone they cannot see and cannot reach. Perseus said he would return the eye when they told him where the Gorgons lived. Now hold both things at once. Perseus was trying to protect his mother. He was a young man without resources or power, placed in an impossible situation by a king who wanted him dead. And he had found the one mechanism available to him for getting the information he needed to survive the mission and come home. There is a logic to what he did that is not easy to dismiss. He applied the leverage he had. He got the result he needed. He kept his word and returned the eye when he had what he came for. And he used 3 blind women to lead him to their sister. He did not force the Graier to betray Medusa through cruelty or malice. He forced them through the oldest mechanism that power has ever used against people who stand between it and what it wants. Find the thing that matters most to them. Remove it. Wait. There is no version of the negotiation in which the Graier had meaningful choice. Perseus held the only leverage that existed, and he applied it without hesitation. Because the mission required it, and the gods who had equipped him for the mission had not included in the toolkit any alternative approach. He got what he needed. He gave the eye back. He left, behind him in the cave. The Graier passed the eye between them and looked at the entrance and saw nothing that could be done now. The directions had been given. The road to their sister had been opened by the people who loved her most. Because there was no other way to keep the eye, and no other eye to keep. They sat with what they had been made to do. This is the part of the story that the mythology records as a logistical sequence, and that is actually a grief. Not the grief of the dramatic gesture. Not the grief of the wailing and the tearing of garments that the mythology associates with large losses. The quiet grief of people who did what survival required, and now have to live inside the knowledge of what survival required. The road to Medusa ran through her family. Perseus flew west. The helm kept him invisible. Behind him, the dim light of the cave held its permanent grey, and the eye passed between 3 women who now knew something they could not undo, knowing. And the directions they had given were already being followed by someone moving faster than grief. Their sister was still alive. For a little while longer. The road, once opened, does not ask permission before it is travelled. The shield is not a weapon. This seems like an obvious thing to say, but it is worth saying directly before moving into what the shield actually is. Because the mythological tradition tends to fold it into the list of divine gifts alongside the blade and the sandals, as if it were simply another tool of violence. Another item in the heroic arsenal. The shield is not a weapon. It is a way of looking, and in a story that has been, from the very first image in the prologue, a story about looking and the consequences of looking and what happens when people refuse to look directly at what is in front of them. The shield is not a peripheral detail. It is the center of everything. Perseus descends towards Sarpedon in the hours before dawn, when the sky at the edge of the world holds the specific grey that belongs to the time between night and morning, the grey that has no color in it yet, only the memory of darkness and the suggestion of what comes next. He has the helm of invisibility and the winged sandals and the harp at his side, and the kibisis open and ready, and he has the shield raised in front of him, tilted at the angle he has been calculating since before he began the descent. The cliff face of Sarpedon comes into focus below him, and then in the reflection of the polished bronze. He finds her. She is sleeping, not coiled for attack, not radiating visible danger, not the grotesque face from the ancient pottery, not the screaming figure from the later paintings, not any of the shapes that the word monster conjures when someone says it in the context of a hero's quest. She is asleep in the way that mortal creatures sleep, the body released from the tension of waking, the face in the specific softness of unconsciousness. Breathing. Perseus looks at this through the shield. He sees a creature asleep. Now hold what you know about her. You have been with her at Sarpedon. You have seen the mornings there, the way the light came back to the water in stages, the way the stars surrounded you rather than hovering above. You have sat with Steno and Euryale in the ordinary afternoon of their visits, felt the specific quality of a gaze returned without flinching. You have walked among the stone figures and understood them not as evidence of a monster's power, but as the record of an uncontrolled condition that was given to her without consent. You have watched her build a life in the only geography the world left her and make that geography hers. Perseus does not know any of this, not because he is incapable of knowing, because the toolkit he was given did not include any instrument for finding out. The shield shows him the angle of approach. The blade is designed for the cut. The bag is designed for the contents. And the knowledge that would have complicated the mission, the knowledge of the morning light at Sarpedon, and the sisters who came, and the life that was genuinely hers in the margins. That knowledge was not part of the equipment. He was given everything, except the tools for doubt. Think about who assembled that toolkit. Athena provided the shield. Athena, the goddess of strategic intelligence, who was in this story before it was Perseus's story, who made a decision in a temple a long time ago about what needed to be corrected, who had been invested in a specific outcome for longer than this young man had been alive. The shield she gave him was designed for exactly the kind of looking that her own decision had made necessary. It was the perfect instrument for a mission she had reasons of her own to want completed. He has a mother to protect. He has a promise made at a feast that he cannot walk back from, without consequences he cannot absorb. He has the gods behind him. He raises the harp. The reflection in the shield does not change. She is still asleep. The snakes of her hair move in the slight disturbance of air that his descent has created. A small, autonomic response. Nothing like awareness. Nothing like the beginning of waking. The cliff is still. The sea below is still. The grey sky holds its breath. What would have happened if he had stopped? If Perseus, in the last seconds before the cut, had looked at the reflection one more time and asked the question that the reflection made available, but that everything around him was conspiring to prevent him from asking, what is this person's story? How did she get here? What was done to her, and by whom? And what were the choices she actually made? And what were the conditions imposed on her that she never had a voice in? He did not stop. This is not because he was incapable of stopping. It is because stopping was not what the situation he had been placed in was designed to produce. The shield was designed to navigate. The blade was designed to cut. The bag was designed to carry. Every item in the divine toolkit was oriented toward the completion of the mission. And the mission had a momentum built into it by the people who designed it. A weight that had been accumulating since before Perseus stood at a feast on a small island and said he would bring whatever Polydectes wanted. He makes the cut. The shield showed him how to kill her. It did not show him who she was. And in that gap, in the space between the image in the reflection and the person the image belonged to, in the distance between a mirror and a window, is the thing the entire story has been building toward saying. We have been looking at Medusa in reflections for 3,000 years. We have called the reflection her story. We have put her face on our shields and called it protection. We have told her death as a victory and called it myth. And, in all of that looking, In all of those centuries of shields raised between ourselves and a direct view of who she was and what was done to her and what it cost her, the question we have consistently declined to ask is the simplest one. What did she see? In the reflection on the water at Sarpedon? In the eyes of her sisters who could look at her without turning to stone? In the mornings, when the color came back to the sea, and the salt air moved through the cliff grass, and the strange old stars of that unnamed sky were still fading? What was it like to be her? The shield does not answer this question. The shield was never built to answer this question. The shield was built to avoid it. The night before was ordinary. This is the thing about the nights before everything changes. They do not announce themselves. They arrive wearing the same clothes as every other night, with the same sounds and the same darkness and the same quality of air, and there is nothing in them that distinguishes them from the 1,000 nights that came before except the thing that follows them, which they cannot know is coming, and which will make them, in retrospect, the last of a particular kind of night that will never come again. The sea at Sarpedon moved the way it always moved. The stars came out in the configurations that belonged to that sky. The configurations that had no names in any city's astronomy, because no city's astronomers had ever looked up from this particular piece of coast at this particular angle and decided that what they saw was worth mapping. The grass on the cliff faces moved in the small wind that came off the water after dark. The specific small wind that Medusa had learned to feel on her face as a marker of the time. As reliable as any clock in a place that had no clocks. The three sisters slept, Stheno on the left, in the stillness of someone for whom sleep is not a biological necessity but a choice, a voluntary entry into a quieter mode of existing that she could exit at any moment without the grogginess that afflicts mortal sleepers. Euryale on the right, with the deeper surrender of someone who felt everything and needed the hours of not feeling to balance the hours of feeling, and Medusa in the middle, in the warmth between her sisters, breathing the salt air of the only home she had known for longer than most mortal civilizations had existed. She was asleep. The darkness was the true dark of the periphery, the dark that does not apologize for itself or offer the comfort of nearby illumination. The dark that simply is what the absence of light is when there is nothing nearby to generate light. Into this darkness, a shadow moved. He came from above, which was the advantage the winged sandals gave him. The ability to approach from the one direction that the geography of Sarpedon did not naturally defend against. He descended slowly, because the helm of invisibility made sound irrelevant, but the wind of rapid descent would have been felt, and he was careful the way a person is careful when they are doing something that requires precision and cannot be done twice. He had the shield up before he was close enough for it to matter. He had found her in the reflection before he committed to the descent, navigating the last 100 feet of approach by the image in the bronze surface, keeping his eyes on the reflection and not on the source. He maintained the discipline that the entire mission had been built around. The discipline of not looking directly at the thing he was approaching. The cliff was still. The sea below was still. The small wind moved through the cliff grass with its usual patience, touching everything with the same indifferent tenderness. The rocks and the grass and the sleeping women and the invisible man descending toward them, touching all of it the same way, making no distinctions. She looked smaller in the reflection than the stories had made her. She was asleep, in the way that mortal creatures sleep. The body released from the tension of waking, the face in the specific softness of unconsciousness. The snakes of her hair moved slightly in the small disturbance his approach had created in the air. A slow and barely perceptible movement. Nothing like waking, nothing like awareness. Just the autonomic response of living things to the presence of something moving nearby. She did not know he was there. She did not get the chance to know. He raised the harp. He made the cut. And then the silence that followed was not the silence of the cliff before he arrived. It was a different silence. The silence that comes after something irreversible. The silence that has a specific weight and a specific quality that ordinary silence does not have. The silence of a world in which something that was true a moment ago is no longer true and will never be true again. For a moment, nothing moved. The sea continued. The small wind continued. The stars continued their slow movement across the unnamed sky. The world outside the cliff face of Sarpedon proceeded with the same indifference to events that seas and winds and stars have always maintained toward the events of individual lives. Even lives as unusual as this one. Then, Stheno woke. Immortals do not sleep the way mortals sleep. The transition between sleep and waking is shorter, sharper. Stheno went from asleep to fully alert in the time it took the air to change quality. In the moment when the stillness of the sleeping cliff gave way to the specific disturbance of something that had just become irreversible. She understood before she looked. She had been watching Medusa for longer than most mortal civilizations had existed. She had been watching with the specific attention of an immortal who knew what mortal meant, and had been filing that knowledge away in the permanent record of a mind that would carry it forever. She understood before she looked because she had known, in the part of her that dealt in long-term probabilities, that the story was moving towards something like this. She looked. The looking was instant, and the understanding was instant, and what followed the understanding was something that had no name in the mythology's vocabulary. Something that Stheno, who had lived long enough to have a name for most things, did not have a name for. Uriel woke to the sound of Stheno, and then Uriel made the sound that Pindar preserved across 25 centuries. It came from somewhere below language, below the level at which grief can be organized into expression and controlled by the mechanisms of communication. It was not a word, and not a sentence, and not a cry in any civilized sense. It was the sound of a body that could not die being forced to understand that something it loved was gone. The specific impossibility of that combination, the incompatibility of immortality, and this particular loss, expressed as a sound that had no precedent because the situation had no precedent. Athena, the mythology tells us, heard that sound, and she made music from it. She fashioned the flute as an attempt to capture something of that frequency, to hold in an instrument what it sounded like when grief was that large. The instrument that would go on to accompany weddings and festivals and the drinking songs of men who had no idea where it came from. In Pindar's telling, that instrument began here, on this cliff, in this moment, in the sound that Euryale made when she could not find words for what she had just lost. Perseus was already moving. He had the cabesis in his hands, the head inside it, and the helm of Hades on his head. And he rose on the Talaria because the mission had an escape phase, and the escape phase was now, because the two remaining Gorgons were awake, and the sound coming from the cliff face was the kind of sound that precedes pursuit. They came after him. They rose from the cliff at Sarpedon with the full force of what they were, two immortal beings in the fury of sisters who had just watched the third one die, who had shown up at that remote geography again and again across the years because she was worth showing up for, who had looked at her directly when the world could not, who had loved her in the only way available to them. They could not catch what they could not see. Perseus flew. The helm kept him invisible. Behind him, the sound grew smaller with distance, and then smaller still, and then finally too small to hear. But Pindar heard it and turned it into music, and the music went everywhere that music goes, into every room and every ceremony and every human occasion that needed a sound to hold what words could not, into weddings and funerals and temple ceremonies and the quiet moments when someone alone in a room needed something that existed in the space between silence and speech. The music went everywhere. The woman it came from stayed at Sarpedon, on the cliff face, in the place that had been hers, as the beginning of everything that came after. Ask the mythology what came from Medusa's death, and it will give you wonders. Ask it what Medusa herself received from the same event, and it will give you silence. This asymmetry is not an accident of transmission. It is not something that got lost in the centuries between the first telling and the versions that survived. It is a structural feature of the way the story was always told, a characteristic of the grammar that hero myths use. The grammar that organizes events around the hero's gains and losses rather than around the costs paid by the people the hero passes through on the way to his victory. Perseus gained the head. The head was the mission. The mission was complete. From the wound at Medusa's neck, something emerged. Pegasus, a horse with wings, white, already flying, rising from the wound with the ease of a creature that had been waiting for this moment since before it existed. He does not pause. He does not look back at what he came from. He rises into the grey sky above Sarpedon and keeps rising. And the mythology follows him with the kind of helpless enthusiasm that beautiful things tend to generate. An enthusiasm that has a way of forgetting to notice what it has turned away from. Alongside Pegasus came Chrysaor, the golden-sworded, a being whose mythology would extend into further stories that the world would tell with great enthusiasm and equally minimal reference to where he came from. Both of them came from her. Both of them will be remembered for things that have nothing to do with her. Now sit with the question the mythology does not ask. How long was she pregnant? This sounds like a strange thing to ask of a myth, but it changes the shape of everything. Medusa was mortal. She could carry children the way mortal creatures carry children, and the children who emerged from her death were fathered by Poseidon, which means they were conceived before the transformation, in whatever encounter between Medusa and the god of the sea produced them. In Hesiod's version, in a soft meadow. In Ovid's version, in the temple that was supposed to protect her, she had been carrying them. Through the transformation, through the years at Sarpedon, through the visits from her sisters and the mornings when the color came back to the sea and the long cold nights when the stars surrounded her rather than hovering above. Through all of it, she had been carrying what Poseidon had left behind, in the body that had been changed without her consent, in the life that had been compressed into the margins of the world. Did she know? The mythology does not say. If she knew, then the years at Sarpedon have a different quality than the mythology gives them. They are not only the years of exile and isolation and the slow accumulation of stone figures around her home, they are also the years of waiting, of carrying, of knowing that she contained something that was both Poseidon's legacy and her own, something that would outlive her and go into the world she could no longer safely move through and become part of the stories told there. If she knew, she carried that knowledge alone. Like most of the things in her life, Pegasus became the horse of the muses. His hoof strike on the mountain of Helicon caused the spring of poetic inspiration to flow. Poets invoked him as the symbol of the mind's capacity to leave the ordinary world behind and travel to places that ordinary travel cannot reach. He appeared on coins and in constellations and in the names of companies in the 21st century. His image so far removed from the cliff at Sarpedon that no one looking at the name on an aerospace logo would necessarily think about where the name came from. He was separated, completely, from the woman who contained him. This is how it always works with the things that come from Medusa. The world takes what she produces and naturalizes it, makes it part of the ongoing story without keeping the thread that connects it to its origin. Pegasus is a symbol of beauty and freedom. His mother is a symbol of danger and monstrosity. The two exist in separate symbolic registers, never placed next to each other in a way that would require the world to account for the distance between them. But they came from the same place, from the same body, from the same life that the world had compressed into the margins and then ended with a blade designed for exactly that ending. Perseus ran. He did not look back. He had the winged sandals and the kibisis with the head inside it, and behind him the sound of two immortal sisters in pursuit. And ahead of him, the vast sky over the Mediterranean, and the long flight back toward the world of people and cities, and the king on the small rocky island who was going to learn that the young man he had sent to die had returned. He did not look back at the wound, at the cliff face, at the two sisters circling the place where their sister had been, searching for the invisible man who was already gone. At Pegasus, still rising, the white shape of him growing smaller against the sky that had no name, becoming a point of light, and then becoming nothing, and then becoming a story the world would tell forever, without remembering what it cost to produce him. Perseus flew east. The wonders he carried in the categorize and the wonders he left behind in the sky over Sarpedon continued their separate journeys towards separate futures. Neither of those futures belonged to Medusa. Both of them were made from her. The categorize was a bag. This is worth stating plainly before anything else, because the mythology tends to let the divine origin of the object obscure what the object actually was. It was a container. It held something inside it. It was carried on a strap over the shoulder of a young man flying east over the Mediterranean. And the something inside it was the severed head of a woman who had been asleep when he took it. The head was still functional, the power that Medusa had while living. The gaze that turned whatever met it to stone did not end with her death. It persisted in the head. The eyes, closed inside the categorize, were still capable of what they had always been capable of, still holding the power that had been given to Medusa without her consent, and that outlasted her by a considerable margin. She was dead. Her power was not. Perseus understood this. The categorize existed precisely because someone in the preparation phase of the mission had thought through the logistics of what came after the killing and had produced a container that would hold the head safely. The mission had not ended at Sarpedon. The mission had a second act, several second acts. As it turned out, the first was not planned. Perseus was flying south along the coast of Africa, passing over Ethiopia. When he saw her, picture what he saw from above: a coastline, a rock jutting out into the water, dark against the pale sea, and on the rock, a young woman, chained at the wrists and ankles, her hair moving in the sea wind, standing in the specific stillness of someone who has been left somewhere and told that what comes next is beyond anyone's ability to change. Her name was Andromeda. She had been placed on that rock by her own people, offered up to a sea monster called Cetus as a sacrifice to satisfy Poseidon's anger at her mother Cassiopeia, who had made the mistake of claiming that Andromeda's beauty exceeded that of the sea nymphs. The details of how a mother's boast becomes a daughter's death sentence are their own chapter in the machinery of divine politics. The relevant fact here is simple. A woman was chained to a rock. She was waiting to be consumed by a monster. Perseus descended. He spoke with Andromeda's father, Cepheus, who was standing on the shore in the posture of a man who has run out of options and is watching the last one play out badly. Perseus offered to kill the sea monster in exchange for Andromeda's hand in marriage. Cepheus agreed. Perseus killed the monster, using conventional means rather than the categorize, and Andromeda was unchained, and the marriage was arranged. One woman unchained from a rock, by a man carrying the head of a woman who had never been unchained from anything. Later, at the wedding feast, a man named Phineus arrived. He came with armed men, enough of them to make the point without anyone having to say the point. He had a prior claim to Andromeda, a betrothal that predated Perseus, and he had decided that the wedding was an opportunity to make that claim physical. The feast hall shifted from celebration to the particular tension of a room that has just understood that it is about to become a battleground. Perseus looked at the armed men. He looked at Phineus. He told the room to look away. Some did not, or could not. In the chaos of the moment, as hands reached for weapons and bodies moved toward each other, and the geometry of the room compressed into the geometry of a fight, Perseus opened the cubesis. He held up the head. The men who had not looked away were stone before they could close the distance. Phineus himself, frozen mid-movement. The expression on his face preserved forever in the exact configuration it held. In the moment he understood what was happening, Perseus put the head back in the bag. The feast resumed. Think about what just happened. The power that had been given to Medusa without her consent. The power that had made her an exile at the edge of the world. The power that had been used as the justification for her death. That power was used by the man who killed her to win an argument at his own wedding. Andromeda was freed by a man carrying the head of a woman who had not been freed, the stone figures at Sarpedon. The record of Medusa's involuntary power had been the evidence used to justify her death. The same power, extracted and carried in a bag, was now the evidence of Perseus's triumph. One woman's inability to control her gaze had made her a monster. Another man's ability to deploy that gaze on demand made him a hero. The difference between the monster and the hero was who held the head. Perseus continued east, flying over Libya. Blood from the cubesis dripped through the fabric and fell onto the Saharan sand and became snakes. The mythology offers this as an origin story for the serpents of North Africa, a geographical explanation delivered as a consequence of the journey. The blood of Medusa, falling onto unfamiliar ground, producing new life in a desert she had never seen, in a continent she had never known. Her blood went places she never went. Her power went places her body never went. All of it without her permission, without her knowledge, without any version of her having any say in where the things that came from her ended up or what they were used for. Then Seriphos. Perseus arrived at the island where the story began. The small rocky place where a king had stood at the head of a feast table and named an impossible price and smiled at a young man he expected never to see again. Polydectes was having a feast when Perseus walked in. The symmetry is exact and probably intentional. A feast was where the mission began. A feast was where it ended. The same hall, or a hall like it. The torchlight, the smell of wine, the king at the head of the table. And this time, something in the king's face. When the door opened, that was not the expression he had been wearing a moment before. Perseus was back, with the head. Polydectes could not hide what his face was doing fast enough. Perseus looked at the room. He found the people he needed to protect. The servants and the guests who had not been part of what Polydectes had done, and he told them to look away. Then he opened the cubesis one more time and held the head up toward the man who had sent him to die. Polydect was stone, whatever expression his face had been making in the last moment, whatever combination of surprise and calculation, and the specific fear of a man who realizes that the instrument he aimed at someone else has turned around. That expression was preserved now in permanent stone in the hall of Seriphos. Justice. The mythology calls this, and it was justice, of the specific kind that the story had been building toward. The man who had used his power to threaten a woman and eliminate the person protecting her had been eliminated by the power that same person brought back from the edge of the world. Dana was free. Polydect was gone. The mission had returned exactly what it was supposed to return. But the instrument of that justice was Medusa. Dana was protected by the power of a woman who had not been protected. Polydectes was punished by the power of a woman who had not been avenged. A mother was freed by the head of a woman whose sisters were still circling a cliff face at the edge of the world, searching for a man they could not see, crying a sound that Pindar would one day turn into music, and the world would one day play at weddings. Perseus put the head back in the bag. He went to find his mother. The cubesis was heavier on the way across the island than it had been on the way back across the sea. Not physically. The weight of a head does not change based on what the head has been used for. But the mission had accumulated something in the course of its second acts, something that the original briefing at the divine toolkit distribution had not accounted for. something that had no name in the list of items Perseus had been given. The weight of what the head had cost to produce. He carried it in a bag. He had one more delivery to make. Stand in front of any ancient Greek statue of Athena and find the aegis. It is not always rendered the same way. Sometimes it appears as a breastplate, sometimes as a cloak, sometimes as a divine garment that hangs over the chest and shoulders in a way that has no exact equivalent in the armor of mortal soldiers. But in every version, in every rendering across every century of Greek and Roman art that depicted the goddess of wisdom in her divine armor, the aegis has the same detail at its center. Aphache, the face of Medusa, mounted on the protective garment of the goddess whose decision had set in motion the chain of events that ended on the cliff at Sarpedon, worn by the divine authority whose temple had been the location of the violation that began everything, positioned at the center of the armor that Athena carried into the wars of gods and the world. The face that had been a lethal power pointed at everything Medusa encountered now, pointed outward from the chest of the goddess who had made it lethal. Perseus delivered what he had promised. He presented the kibisis to Athena and completed the transactional loop that had begun with her gift of the shield. She had given him the instrument for avoiding the gaze. He returned the gaze to her. Athena received the head. She opened the kibisis and looked at what was inside. The ancient sources do not record what passed across Athena's face in that moment. They do not give us the interior of the goddess in the instant of looking at what her chain of decisions had ultimately produced. They give us only what came next. She attached the head to the aegis. Now hold the sequence of this from the beginning. Athena had a temple. Something happened in that temple. She responded to what happened by transforming the woman who had been present. The transformation made the woman dangerous in a new and specific way. The danger was used to justify sending a hero to kill the woman. The hero succeeded. The hero returned the head. Athena took the head and put it on her armor. At every stage of this sequence, Athena made a choice: the transformation, the divine support for Perseus's mission, the gift of the shield, and now this, the taking of the head, the mounting of it at the center of her divine protection. The decision to wear the face of the woman she had transformed as the most prominent feature of her own armor. The mythology does not present this as morally complex. It presents it as a detail of Athena's iconography, as consistent and unremarkable as the owl or the olive branch. She wore Medusa's face. This is who Athena is. This is how she looks. But hold the sequence next to the iconographic fact and let the combination do what it does. When Medusa lived, her face was called a weapon. It was called the thing that made her dangerous, the reason she had to be exiled, the justification for her death. The face that turned people to stone was the evidence of what she was and why the world could not allow her to remain what she was. When Athena wore Medusa's face, the same face was called protection, the same power, the same eyes, the same capacity to stop in their tracks, whatever met that gaze, was now displayed on the armor of the goddess of civilization, pointed outward at the enemies of the divine order, performing the protective function with full divine authority behind it. Same face, different holder. One framing produced a monster, the other produced a goddess in armor. There is a reading of Athena's decision that presents it as a form of honor, a way of keeping Medusa present in the world, of ensuring she was not simply erased by her death, but carried forward in the most prominent position available, at the center of divine power, seen by everyone who encountered the goddess. In this reading, the aegis is tribute. Athena takes the face of the person the system failed and puts it where it will be seen forever. This reading is available. It is also deeply convenient for everyone except Medusa, because Medusa was not asked. The honor, if honor it was arranged without the consent of the person being honored. The preservation, if preservation it was preserved a face attached to the armor of the person whose decision had set the entire sequence in motion. And the function the face performed on Athena's aegis was the same function Medusa had performed throughout her mythology. She was useful. She was used. She had been useful to Polydectes as a death sentence. She had been useful to Perseus as a weapon. She was useful to Athena as armor. In not one of these uses was she consulted. In not one of these uses did the person doing the using stop to account for what the use cost the person being used. Was Medusa punished because she was dangerous? Or did she become useful because she had been made dangerous? The aegis does not answer this question. The aegis is the question. It has been the question since Perseus placed the cabesis in Athena's hands, and Athena opened it and looked at the face she had last seen on a woman in a temple a long time ago, and decided that this face belonged on her armor. She put it there. She has been wearing it ever since. The face that could not be allowed to live became the face the goddess chose to wear. The owl sees clearly in the dark. Sometimes what it sees, it keeps. Start with a simple fact. For roughly 1,000 years, across the entire Mediterranean world, from the Greek colonies in the Black Sea to the Roman outposts at the edge of the Sahara, from the temples of Sicily to the marketplaces of Asia Minor, one face appeared more consistently than almost any other on objects of protection and power. Not the face of Zeus, not the face of Athena, not the face of any of the 12 Olympians, whose names dominated the religious and civic life of the ancient world. The face of Medusa. The Greeks and Romans had a word for it. Gorgoneion. The Gorgon thing. The face extracted from the body. The head separated from the person. The image functioning independently of any narrative context. Any story. Any explanation of what the face was or where it came from or what had happened to produce it. Just the face. Eyes wide. Hair moving. The expression that sits somewhere between rage and terror, and a third thing that has no clean name. The expression of something that sees you seeing it, and has not yet decided what to do about that. The Gorgoneion was everywhere because it worked. This requires understanding something about how the ancient world thought about images and power. Something that the modern world has mostly lost the instinct for, even if it has not entirely lost the practice. In the Greek and Roman world, images were not representations. They were presences. A painting of a god in a temple was not a reminder of the god. It was, in some meaningful sense, the god. The image participated in the reality it depicted. The Gorgoneion, in this framework, was not a picture of a scary face put on things to make them look intimidating. It was the face itself, the actual presence of Medusa's gaze, deployed in concentrated form on the surface of an object to extend that object's power into a different register. The technical term scholars use is apotropaic, from the Greek apotropaios, meaning that which turns away. An apotropaic image was a specific and intentional technology. You placed something frightening on the thing you wanted to protect, and the frightening thing looked outward at the world on behalf of the protected thing, and whatever was frightening in the world encountered that face first. Fear against fear, the most frightening face in the Greek mythological imagination, placed at the perimeter of the thing you most needed to keep safe. Now walk through the ancient world with that understanding and look for the face. The Temple of Artemis at Corfu, built in the early 6th century before the Common Era, placed a massive gorgon at the center of its pediment, not a small decorative element worked into a corner. The central figure, the face at the front of the building, large enough to be seen from a considerable distance, large enough to establish its presence before the building itself resolved into detail. You saw the Gorgon before you saw the temple. The message was not complicated. This place is protected. What protects it is something you should think carefully about before you decide to threaten it. The coins of Syracuse, struck in the 5th and 4th centuries before the Common Era. Put the Gorgoneion on the reverse face. These were high-value coins. Coins used in significant transactions. Coins that passed through many hands in the course of a day's commerce in one of the most prosperous cities in the Greek world. Every person who handled those coins handled Medusa's face. Every transaction was conducted under her gaze, on the back of her image, with her eyes looking up from the palm of the hand that held her. She was not decorating the economy. She was protecting it. The Roman mosaic floor found at Sousse, in what is now Tunisia, a second-century work of considerable sophistication, places the head of Medusa at the center of an intricate geometric pattern. The mosaic covers the floor of a room in a wealthy Roman home. Anyone who entered that room walked across Medusa's face. The geometry of the pattern is organized around her, flowing outward from her eyes in patterns that fill the room to its edges. She was the center of the room. She was walked on. She was the protection of the household. All of these simultaneously. The Augustus of Prima Porta, the famous marble statue of Rome's first emperor, discovered in the 19th century, shows Augustus in military dress. His breastplate is decorated with an elaborate scene of divine and cosmic significance. The imagery carefully chosen to communicate the emperor's divine authority and cosmic importance. At the center of the breastplate, the position of maximum visual prominence, is the Gorgoneion. Augustus wore Medusa's face on his chest. The first emperor of Rome chose the face of a woman from the edge of the Greek world as the central image of his divine authority. Hold these images together now and feel the full weight of what they reveal. The Gorgoneion on the temple at Corfu says, "This sacred space is under protection." The Gorgoneion on the coins of Syracuse says, "This economic transaction is under protection." The Gorgoneion on the floor at Sousse says, "This private home is under protection." The Gorgoneion on the breastplate of Augustus says, "This empire is under divine protection." Every significant category of human organization in the ancient Mediterranean world, the sacred, the economic, the domestic, the political, was placed under the protection of this one face, the face of the woman who had been given no protection at all. This is the monument to the conversion that the mythology performed on Medusa across the centuries. She was, while living, a problem to be solved. She was, once dead, a resource to be deployed, and the deployment was so complete, so thorough, so woven into the fabric of everything the ancient world built and valued and defended, that, over time, the Gorgoneion became simply a design element, a traditional motif, a thing you put on certain objects because that was the kind of object that had that on it. The history behind the image receded. The woman behind the face disappeared. What remained was the face, stripped of its story, available for attachment to any meaning that needed a face with that specific quality of presence, that particular combination of power and the expression that sits between rage and terror, and the third thing that has no name, and perhaps the most extraordinary thing about the Gorgoneion, the detail that should stop you for a moment when you see it on the coin or the temple pediment or the floor mosaic or the emperor's chest, is this: the face on all of those objects is the face of someone who was failed by every institution that was supposed to protect her. The most powerful protective image in the ancient Mediterranean world was the face of a woman who had been failed by the temple, transformed by the goddess, exiled to the edge of the world, hunted by a hero she had never threatened, and killed in her sleep. And then her face was placed on every shield, and then her face was placed on every temple, and then her face was the center of the floor in wealthy Roman homes, and then her face was on the chest of the emperor, and then her face was called protection. Nobody stopped to ask whether the most powerful protective image in Western civilization was powered by the specific energy of a person who had been given no protection at all. The Gorgoneion looks outward from every surface it occupies. It has always looked outward. It has been looking outward for nearly 3,000 years. Whatever it is looking at, it has not looked away yet. Walk into a Versace store anywhere in the world. Find the logo. It is on the shopping bags and the receipts and the packaging and the brand materials and the products themselves, stitched or printed or embossed onto fabric and leather and metal. It has been the visual identity of one of the most recognized luxury brands in the world since Gianni Versace chose it in 1978, the year he founded the company. It is the face of Medusa. Versace said he chose her because she represented beauty and power and the ability to make people fall in love with you, to hold them captivated, to stop them in place. He said she represented everything he wanted his brand to mean. He was working in the tradition of the ancient world, whether he knew it consciously or not. The tradition that understood the Gorgoneion as concentrated power, as the face that held its viewers in place. He put her on shopping bags. She has been there ever since. In 2008, the artist Luciano Garbati began a sculpture he would work on for 8 years. He called it Medusa, with the head of Perseus. It shows a woman standing in the posture that Cellini's Perseus has occupied since 1554. The posture of the victorious hero, displaying the defeated enemy's head. Except the woman is Medusa, and the head she is holding, hanging at her side, is the head of Perseus. The statue was cast in bronze and installed across from the Manhattan courthouse, where Harvey Weinstein's criminal trial was held in 2020. It stood there during the trial. It looked across the street at the building where a case was being decided that the world had decided was about, among other things, institutional power and who it protects, and what happens to the people it does not protect. The timing was not coincidental. The choice of Medusa was not coincidental. People photographed themselves with the statue. They made it the background of profile pictures. They wrote about it and shared it and argued about it and put it on posters. The face that had been on shopping bags and coin reverses and temple pediments and emperor's breastplates was now on phone screens. Millions of them, held up and angled and lit by the specific quality of light that makes things look significant on a small, glowing rectangle. She was still stopping people in their tracks. The power had not diminished. In Japan, the image of Medusa has appeared in video games and manga and anime for decades, specifically in the role of a powerful figure whose danger is expressed through her gaze, the specific quality of her power, the looking and the consequence of being looked at, translates across cultural contexts with remarkable consistency, as if something in the human nervous system recognizes it, regardless of the tradition it arrives through. In tattoo studios in every city where tattoo studios exist, Medusa is one of the most requested images. The people who ask for her are not all scholars of classical mythology. They are not all approaching her through any particular reinterpretation or political framework. They are approaching her through the more direct channel of a face that they want to carry on their body permanently. A face that means something to them that they may or may not be able to fully articulate, but that they know they want to carry. They are doing what the ancient world did when it put her face on shields. They are deciding that this particular face offers something: protection. For some, recognition. For others, the specific resonance of a story that moved in one direction for 3,000 years and is being held up to the light from a different angle now. Whatever it is strong enough to be made permanent, strong enough to be carried on skin rather than bronze, strong enough to outlast the trends in imagery that come and go. The Medusa of Caravaggio, painted in 1597 on a ceremonial shield, shows the moment of her death, the head just severed, the face in the expression of someone who has just understood what has happened and has not yet had time to respond to the understanding. The mouth is open, the eyes are wide, the snakes of her hair are moving in the sudden freedom of no longer being attached to a living body. She is in the moment between. That painting has been in the Uffizi Gallery in Florence for centuries. Millions of people have stood in front of it. The face in that moment, the face that Caravaggio painted on a circular surface in the shape of the shield it was always destined to be, has accumulated a kind of looking over those centuries that very few images in human history have accumulated. People keep looking at her. She keeps not looking away. This is what has kept the name alive when so many names from the same mythology have faded to academic footnotes. Perseus is a name that classical scholars know well. Andromeda is a galaxy. Cepheus and Cassiopeia are constellations in the northern sky. Medusa is a logo on a shopping bag. Medusa is a bronze statue outside a courthouse. Medusa is a tattoo on a forearm on a subway in any city you can name. Medusa is on a phone screen held up in front of a bronze face on a Manhattan street corner on a Tuesday morning by someone who has somewhere else to be, but stopped anyway. The reason for this persistence is not that her story is more dramatic than other mythological stories. It is not that her imagery is more visually striking than other mythological images, though it is certainly striking. It is not even that each new generation finds in her story a mirror for its current conversations about power, though each generation does. The reason she persists is simpler and harder to say. She is the face that forces you to stop, whatever she turned people to stone with in the mythology, the thing that stopped them in place and held them there and changed them permanently. Something of that function continues across every medium she appears in and every century she appears in. She stops you. She holds you. She makes you still enough, for long enough, to feel the weight of something you were moving past too quickly to notice. The ancient world called this power dangerous. The ancient world also put her face on every shield, every temple, every coin, every emperor's chest. Both things were true simultaneously. And the ancient world lived inside that contradiction without resolving it, because some contradictions cannot be resolved, only inhabited. We are still inhabiting this one. The name that would not stay dead is not staying dead. She is on your phone. She is on a courthouse street corner. She is on a shopping bag. She is on a forearm on a subway, looking outward at the passing walls of a tunnel in a city that was not built yet when her story was first told. She is still looking, after everything the world has done with her face, after every use and reuse and reframing across 3,000 years of being a symbol for other people's meanings. The face is still doing what it has always done. It is looking back. Go back to the beginning. The man in the dark, the shield raised, the reflection in the bronze. We have spent a long time in this story, moving from that image backward through everything that produced it, through the family at the edge of the deep water, and the temple, and the goddess, and the transformation, and the years at Sarpedon, and the sisters who kept showing up, and the king who needed a monster, and the hero who was given every tool, except the tool for understanding what he was being sent to do. We have moved through the death, and the wonders that came from the wound, and the head that kept winning victories for everyone except the person it belonged to, and the face that ended up on every shield in the ancient world, and then on every phone in the modern one. We have looked at a great many reflections. Now turn the shield around, not toward Perseus, not toward the hero's angle of approach, the tactical position, the vantage point from which the mission makes sense and the outcome reads as victory. Turn it the other way. Hold the polished surface facing outward from Sarpedon, facing out toward the world that produced the mission and sent it west on winged sandals, facing toward Seriphos and Olympus and Athens and Rome and the Uffizi and the Manhattan courthouse and the Versace store and the subway forearm and every other place that has held her face up and decided what it meant. Now ask what she saw. She saw the sea at Sarpedon every morning, the color coming back to the water in stages, blue-black to gray to the particular Mediterranean blue that holds its depth even in early light. She saw the cliff grass moving in the wind that came off the water after dark, the small familiar wind she had learned to read as a clock. She saw the stars in configurations that no city's astronomers had named, because no city's astronomers had ever looked up from that piece of coast at that angle and decided the sky was worth mapping. She saw her sisters, Stheno, arriving without announcement, stepping out of the cliff path as if she had always been there. Euryale, watching the sea with the full-body attention of someone for whom feeling the world is a primary mode of existing in it. Both of them looking back at her, meeting her eyes, holding the gaze that no one else in the world could hold. And in that returned gaze, the thing the gaze proves, that she was seen, not her power, not her danger, not her symbolic potential or her usefulness as a protective image or her narrative function in someone else's story. Here, for a long time, in the life, the world had compressed into the margins. She had that. She also saw the stone figures, the record of every accidental meeting. Every pair of eyes that had found hers before their owner understood what finding them meant. She saw them every day, moved among them to reach the water and the high ground and the particular rocks that held warmth longest into the cold part of the morning. She lived with the record of her own power arranged around her in permanent, silent testimony. She did not choose that power. She did not choose the exile. She did not choose the transformation or the temple, or what happened in it, or the way the goddess of wisdom looked at the aftermath and decided what required correction. But she lived with what she had been given in the only way that is ever actually available to anyone, given something they did not choose. She got up in the mornings. She learned the ground. She let her sisters look at her. She breathed the salt air of the only home she had, and she watched the strange old stars of the unnamed sky, and she existed, fully and specifically, in the life that was available to her. And then the man with the shield arrived, and everything she had built in the margins was taken. And then her face was taken, and then her face was put on shields, and then her face was put on temples, and then her face was walked on in floors, and then her face was put on armor, and then her face was put on coins, and then her face went everywhere that power wanted a face to put at its perimeter. A face frightening enough to frighten frightening things. A face that could be detached from its history and reattached to any meaning that needed it. A face available for use because the person it belonged to was no longer available to object. 3,000 years of this. 3,000 years of the face deployed for other people's purposes, carried in other people's hands, displayed on other people's walls and chests and coins and screens. And still, underneath every deployment, underneath every century of reuse and reframing and reinterpretation, underneath the Gorgoneion on the temple pediment and the logo on the shopping bag and the bronze statue outside the courthouse, the face is still the face. Not a symbol, a face, the face of a specific person with a specific history. A woman who was born at the edge of the deep water into a family that the world classified as monsters and who lived there, at the edge of the map, with her sisters and the sea and the particular mornings of Sarpedon, until the world decided it needed something from her and sent a man who could not look at her to take it. The face that looked back from the still water, the face that Stheno watched with the attention of someone whose memory is the only thing that lasts forever. The face that Euryale's grief produced a sound, for that Pindar turned into music, and the world played at weddings. The face that Perseus found in the reflection of a shield, and that Athena mounted on her armor, and that the ancient world put on every surface that needed protecting, and that Caravaggio captured in the moment between alive and not, and that Garbati reversed in bronze on a Manhattan street corner, and that Versace put on a shopping bag, and that someone who needed what it meant had tattooed on their arm this morning in a city that did not exist when the story was first told. That face, still here, still looking. The shield in the prologue showed Perseus a reflection he could manage. The question the epilogue leaves you with is different. If she could look back from every shield that has ever carried her face, through every century of use and reuse, past every hand that has held her up as a symbol for something she did not choose to symbolize. Through the museums and the courthouses and the luxury boutiques and the tattoo studios and the phones, if she could look directly out from all of those surfaces at the world that has been looking at her reflection for 3,000 years, what would she see? People who have been stopping in front of her face since before their civilization had a name for stopping. People who cannot look away. People who have put her face on the things they most need to protect. People who have walked across her face in their own homes. People who have carried her on their bodies. People who have argued about what she means and who she was, and whether she deserved what happened to her, and whether Perseus was a hero or a weapon, and whether Athena was wise or complicit, and whether the story is a tragedy or a warning, or a myth. People who are still here, still watching, still unable to finish with her, still reaching for her name when they need a word for something they cannot otherwise say. Maybe she would recognize this, the way you recognize something you have always known, the power that the world feared in her, the power that stopped people in their tracks and held them still and changed them permanently, has never been her gaze. It has been her story, the story that every era tells differently because every era needs it differently, the story that keeps returning because the questions inside it keep returning. What do we do with the people we cannot look at directly? What do we call the power we take from someone and deploy for ourselves? What is the difference between a monster and a person the world decided to make monstrous? Who gets protected? Who gets used for protection? And when we put a face at the center of everything we want to keep safe, are we honoring the face? Or are we just doing what the world has always done with faces like hers? Using them, looking at the reflection, calling it enough. These are not questions from 3,000 years ago. They are questions from this morning. They will be questions tomorrow. The face on the shield is still looking back. It has always been looking back. We have just been too busy looking at the reflection to notice what the face itself was seeing. What if the most terrifying thing about Medusa was never that she turned people into stone? What if it was that she forced them to become still long enough to see what they had done?